Hi guys, welcome to another video, and in today's video I'm going to be giving a honest review of the resources that I use in preparation for the SQE1. If you're new to the channel, welcome. My name is Favor, and on this channel I film about my SQE journey and tips to help people who are navigating the career in the UK or on the global front. If this is content that sounds interesting to you, please hit the subscription button and join the community. Without further ado, let's jump right into it. First starts by giving a disclaimer. These resources are what worked for me. You need to figure out what's your best structure, what approach might work for you, and what differences that are applicable within your own personal context. I must also state that this video was not sponsored, so the reviews I'm going to be giving are going to be a honest review based on my experience with the resources. Let's get right into it. The SQE stands for the Solicitor's Qualifying Exam. If you're planning to become a solicitor in the United Kingdom, you need to take two legs of exams, the SQE1 and the SQE2. And in preparation for the SQE1, you could either use a training provider who would have resources available readily at your disposal. Or if you were like me and you're not using a training provider, don't panic. You could also access some resources. And I'm going to be listing out the resources that I used and a review of them. In no particular order, I'm going to be starting off with the first resource that I use, and that is the ULaw material. The University of Law materials are very well suited for people who require a solid understanding of the concepts of law. It helps ground your understanding. The biggest strength of this material is that they are extremely comprehensible. They help build a strong legal foundation for understanding all of the topics that are tested. The University of Law manuals are divided into all of the subjects that are tested. Either get the entire bundle, that's the complete set of University of Law SQE materials, or you could pick and choose the textbooks that you want to get. There are also QR codes at the back of each textbook. Once you scan the QR codes, you have access to more practice questions. That's also one of its biggest strengths. Unlike other training providers that you have to pay for the entire training course, with the University of Law, you can access their materials without paying for the full course. So I think that's one of the biggest strengths. The downside, which I've heard from some people, is some people find it quite overwhelming. There's a lot of content to consume. If you're pressed for time, if you're trying to prepare for the SQE within a couple of months, University of Law materials might not be the best for you. However, in my own context, I was preparing for the SQE1 within the space of about 1 year. I think I had a total of 8 months. So I didn't mind the voluminous content of the textbooks. I was able to actually cover the entire textbooks for all of the courses. So do what works best for you. Next resource I use is the Devil's Advocate. This genuinely became one of my favorite resources, and I'm going to explain to you just why. It had concise summaries of all of the topics that were discussed. Unlike the University of Law materials that are physical textbooks, Devil's Advocate can be accessed on their website. So it made it really easy. So you could just access it from anywhere in the world. Also had pictorial representation of the topics that were covered, which made it quite easy to follow. They also had practice questions. I think that's one thing you would find with most of the resources that cover the technical aspects of the topics. You would see that most of them tend to have practice questions. The total number of practice questions per resource may vary, but with the Devil's Advocate, you also have access to practice questions. You have access to podcasts. There's also a crash course. And my favorite aspect of the Devil's Advocate is it was quite affordable, as at the time that I used it, they had a monthly subscription fee that you would just pay, and that gives you access to all of their entire resources. I really like their high yield notes because it really helps during revision. One of the downsides of using the Devil's Advocate is I would not particularly recommend it if you don't have a solid understanding of the law. Like I mentioned earlier, it covers concise summaries of the topics. So in the process of going through the concise summaries, you may not be able to have an accurate understanding if you don't have a solid foundation. And I do have a video where I reviewed the Devil's Advocate in details, and I went through their website and showed all of the different features that they had. If you'd like to have a look at that video, I'll put the link up here and in the description. So please have a look if you're interested in using the Devil's Advocate. The next resource that I used was the revised SQE. With the revised SQE books, this is also divided into different books per subject. So all of the different subjects are different revised SQE manuals. For me, I didn't get all of the subjects. I only got the revised SQE book on the specific subjects that I had difficulty with. And in my context, that was dispute resolution. I found the revised SQE really interesting. It was like devil's advocate, but in a physical copy. It also featured key points and it highlighted common tested areas in the book. Another good thing about the revised SQE books is they included practice questions after each chapter. I wouldn't really share a downside because I didn't use all of the entire books, but from my experience using the revised SQE, I found it really good. I also found the questions really difficult, and I like the fact that they were difficult because it helped ground your understanding of the topics that were covered in each chapter of the textbook. I think that the revised SQE is best suited for people who have specific subjects that they are struggling with and you want to study that subject on the go. It was easy for me to study even on the train because I had it as a physical copy and a book that I could just read anywhere and at any time. The next resource that I used was LawDrills. LawDrills was a fantastic resource powered by AI. It was a bank of thousands of SQE practice questions. This is not like the other resources because this only focused on practice questions. It was personalized and built to study your weak areas. Once it has learned your weak areas, it then started to give you questions or test you based on those weak areas. One good thing I found with the LawDrills was the question style really resembled the actual SQE questions because of how similar the options were. The downside that I quickly found with the LawDrills was first, you cannot revisit incorrect questions. Even though after you've completed a particular question, it breaks down the answers and lets you know why the options were incorrect. Right option was the correct option. It also gives you the opportunity to ask further questions. However, you cannot revisit those questions. So once you click next and you go to the next question, that question is gone. So that was one thing that I did not particularly enjoy. After a while, I noticed the AI became so focused on my weak area that I almost started recognizing the question instead of truly thinking through. I strongly recommend mixing several banks of questions. The next resource that I used was the OneHundred. The OneHundred is also like the LawDrills, but unlike LawDrills, it's not powered by AI. It consists of hundreds of practice questions that are similarly structured like the SQE style. Questions were very difficult, I'm not going to lie. I love that they were really good exam formats. They had the mock option where you could test yourself in the mock exam format. They also had the practice test question where you could test yourself without a time simulator. The downside is, unlike the LawDrills that had the option for you to ask questions about why a particular option was incorrect, the OneHundred only gave you explanation for all of the options, and that was what it was. It was usually short explanation for why the options were either incorrect or why it was correct, and you couldn't go any bit further. However, unlike the LawDrills, you could always revisit previous questions and past questions. Another good thing with the OneHundred is they also have notes. Unlike Devil's Advocate, the OneHundred sells its notes separately. Also, unlike LawDrills, where you have a comprehensive package of all of the bank of resources available, with the OneHundred, you have to buy them individually. So you would often have to buy either the mock practice question, the mock exam separately for FLK1 or FLK2, or you would buy the notes. This could be an advantage or a disadvantage depending on your situation. Another resource that I use, which I always recommend, is the SRA website. The SRA website breaks down the entire curriculum of the SQE1. It talks about what is tested, it talks about the topics that you need to cover and what you need to understand. That's one thing that you definitely need to read before the exam day. Another thing you also need to go through is the practice questions that are placed on the SRA website. The SRA website features two sets of questions. It features practice questions and actual pre-tested questions. Practice questions just gives an idea and a flavor of the kind of questions you would meet during the SQE1 exam. However, there are also pre-tested questions. Pre-tested questions are similar to past questions. In fact, pre-tested questions are exactly the questions that were previously tested in exams. They give you a breakdown showing the percentage of people who got that question wrong. So that gives you a flavor of how tough the question was and how people passed when they took the exam. The downside of the questions on the SRA website, which is not a downside per se, is just the fact that they do not have explanation. So all of the questions on the SRA website just gives you a particular answer. They do not say why this is the correct answer or why the other options are incorrect. So whenever I got something wrong, I always had to research further as to why. The other resource that I used was ChatGPT, and this is a honorable mention to ChatGPT. If you recall earlier, I mentioned using resources that did not have explanation as to why certain questions or why certain options were incorrect. With ChatGPT, I could give it a prompt saying, why is this the answer to this question and not the other options? That made it tailor the answers in such a way that explained the thinking and the reasoning behind why the SRA chose certain answers. With this, I was also able to ground my understanding and build up on previous knowledge. I must also add that the prompts that you use when using ChatGPT is just as important as the question itself. Sometimes the answers ChatGPT could give you would be incorrect based on SRA standard. This is why the prompts that you use in asking ChatGPT, especially when it comes to the practice questions, is so important. Finally, I also use a bunch of other free resources. For instance, the Revised SQE has a blog where they feature updates in the current legal landscape within the UK. This includes changes to the law annually. So it's important that you check the Revised SQE blog from time to time to be updated on those changes in law. There are also free articles and YouTube videos like the one you're watching. I have one video, for instance, where I speak on understanding easements, which is one of the most difficult topics in land law. There are also lots of paid resources that offer a free tester session for you to have an experience of the questions that are contained within their website. I also make sure that I use those resources because the SQE is not just about knowing the law, but understanding how the exam wants you to think. My prayer for you is when you do finally decide to take the SQE, that God makes everything work out for your good and crowns your efforts with good success. Until next time, I will see you in the next video. Bye for now.